Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. I hope you enjoy this podcast series where we discuss important public safety issues and provide insight into who we are as an office and what we do both in the courtroom and in the community to provide the highest level of public safety through prosecution, prevention, and innovation.
In our last episode, we introduced Mervin Brookins of Brother to Brother and how he developed relationships with both the DA's office and the Sacramento Police Department. Today, we'll continue that conversation about how he's working to turn lives around and improve the community.
So one thing that I think is important, if anybody wants to know kind of really who Mervin is, just become his Facebook friend, because you're going to see one day he's at the academy, or the next day he's out at the prison out in Ione. And so, you start to appreciate that he has what I respect is the balance. And he talks about the credible messenger and the transparency and transforming lives, but also that element of accountability. I've never seen him, he's never come to me and say, give this kid a pass because I'm asking you. But he'll say, can you just take a look at this? And so one of the things like we talk about is, our job is both the courtroom and the community. And so from my perspective, our relationship is built not just on the community, it's also the courtroom stuff. So he'll call me up and say, hey, I got this kid, can you guys look at it? And, we have in our county, we get 40,000 police reports a year. We file 25,000 cases. That's a lot of product, I guess you could say, a lot of people, a lot of lives. And we base our decisions, filing decisions in particular, based upon what the police report says. And so for us, it's not that we're not doing our jobs. It's just when Mervin calls up and says, hey, can you look at, Johnny Lee? And I'll say, yeah, we'll pull it for you. I always tell him, and I think he knows this, I use a quote that someone else once said is, this is a pen, it's not a magic wand. And so I think being honest about what we can and cannot do, but it's also helpful for when he says, this is what you need to know about this person. And we listen. What I've learned about this job is we all have our jobs. We share one thing very clearly in common. We're all fixers. We want to help. We may not be able to agree on something, but the value of showing up and listening is a key to building that relationship, because I might show up and tell Mervin, I'm sorry, buddy, we can't do anything with this person. They made a decision and this is the way things are going to roll. But then there might be another case that says, you know what, we have faith in your program. I think he said there was even some kid they pulled off a bus, or an adult, but somebody that they pulled off the bus to prison, and he might be able to tell you that. And we said, okay. So when we respect their program and when Mervin says, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to take ownership in this person, and then they follow through with that, and then that person becomes an incredible product of that community. I just saw one last night about some dude that went to prison is now working for fire department, yes, or Cal Fire,
yes,
or Department of Forestry. And so, they are reclaiming people's lives, but they also need a little help on that. But we also have faith that when they tell us they're going to do something, they're going to do it. But we also, to steal from the chief's thing, is they have them come out to the academy. We send our brand new lawyers now. We have, our brand new lawyers fresh out of law school. We've always said we want people to understand who you're serving, because people go to law school, they get out, they want to be a DA, they want their files, they want to go to court, they want to prosecute people. But we do want people to understand who we are serving and to understand that, there's tremendous need. And so we have our young lawyers go out now and see for programs like Brother to Brother, or, City of Refuge, or La Familia, or whatever these all different great nonprofits are, so that we can understand and we can reflect our community. We're not always going to agree, but if we can take into consideration the work they're doing, then maybe we're all going to do a better job.
We don't advocate for people to just get out of the situations that we're in. One of the things that we try to always communicate is that we're about accountability, transformation, and redemption. And accountability being foremost of that, because we don't want people in the community that are not trying to be good community members as well, but we do realize there's a lot of value in helping people turn their lives around and become productive members of the community. the relationships that we developed with the police officers, Sac PD and Anne Marie, contributes when we have individual young men that are slightly on the path to prison or incarceration, whatever. When we can reach out to them and say, here's an opportunity for you to turn your life around. We'll intervene and advocate for you, because a lot of times they don't have that resource. They don't have that person that can speak up for them. But when we can call the district attorney's office and say, hey, would you take a look at this? And they do, the family takes notice. The person they know they have someone that believes in them. And oftentimes, more often than not, we're able to help that person in that situation. And that word spreads. And that's how Brother to Brother gets credibility in the community. And we're able to help a lot of people. You ask how important are these relationships. Let me give you a specific example of why we do what we do and how this works. A couple of years ago, there was a shooting at Mama Mark's Park in which a young girl got shot. So as you can imagine, I think she was 2 years old or something like that. You can imagine the tensions are high. People are frustrated. Police arrive on the scene, and some of the young men that were there but weren't involved were being detained to find out what had actually happened. So when I got there, the people, the community was like, they got so-and-so in the car, and he didn't have anything to do, so they were animated. And I spoke to the officer who was maintaining the perimeter, Officer Lewis.
And you were a little animated too.
I like the word animated.
Because when I came up, everybody was excited and angry. The typical angry.
Were you called there, or were you there already? How did you
I was on my way to juvenile hall, and somebody called me and said, "Hey," and told me about it. So I came back to the park. And when I got there, everybody was like, "This is what's happening," and they were just indignant. And so I got indignant, and I walked up to Officer Lewis and like, "Well, what's going on? And why you got this guy in the car?" And he's like, "Well, we're trying to, figure out what's going on, and he may know." I'm like, "Well, why? It's hot. Let him out of the car." And he's like, "We can't let him out right now." So we exchanged words, and I was like, "Well, why don't you treat him like you want somebody to treat your family?" And we went back and forth, and he's like, "Hey, man, I'm just trying to do my job." So we talked, and I said something like, "You guys need to be involved in the community instead of just coming out here policing the community." And, but I was kind of polite,
Yeah.
He said, "You know what, I will." And we exchanged numbers. And a couple of months later, after that incident, he called and said, "Hey, this is Officer Lewis." And I'm like, "Officer Lewis?" He said, "Yeah, the one you met at the park." I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Well, hey, you know what? I want to get involved. What do you guys got going on?" And I said, "Well, we're in football season now, so come up to Grant, and these are the times," and hung up and never. I'm like, that was odd, but I never thought he would come. But he showed up and kept coming. Now, at the time, I didn't know Officer Lewis didn't know how to play football, wasn't very athletic. I didn't know that. I was just appreciative that he showed up. And then he came back and he brought Sergeant Chandler, who happened to be one of those mega athletes, the triathlon type of athletes, that was actually able to contribute to the kids and help them understand about training and doing things correctly. But from that relationship grew other relationships. They kept coming back, and they would bring other officers. They brought the gang unit one day. It was like 15 officers that came out, gang unit officers in their gang unit gear. So you can imagine the families in the football stadium like, this is a raid, what's going on? Some of the fathers got nervous because they were gang members, but they came out on the field and interact with the kids, and it was beautiful. And
so as Chief Hahn said, it's the department. It wasn't just Chief Hahn.
It's the department.
Okay.
So over the last couple of years, they've been coming and we've been interacting, and they've gotten to know families. Here's how it came full circle. About 2 months ago, I'd imagine, Officer Lewis was doing his patrol and came across some individuals in the park. I don't know exactly what the situation was, in an apartment complex, and the gang members ran from him. And of course, they chased him down. And one of the kids that ran was one of the kids in our football program that he had met back when he first started coming out. So, and that kid was seen to have thrown something during that chase. So rather than to take it further, he called me and said, hey, I got so-and-so over here. This is the situation. Come get him. I was able to come to the scene, get the young man in question, chastise him, take him home. 2 months later, last week, that same individual competed and won an entrepreneurial workshop for young men, and his app was an app that allowed you to vote by your phone. I mean, just it was brilliant. And I can't, but they had all the bugs worked out. I think he won like $500. He was able to present in a suit and tie. I mean, just changed his life. Had we not had that relationship, that young man would have been in juvenile hall.
For the officer to call you out.
For the officer to call. And that's not the only time he's called. We communicate at least once a week. And he's like, hey, just be aware, or this is what's going on, or keep your eye on, I saw him out. And we're able to reach people before they get into that circumstances. Vernon is just one individual, the young man in question. But saving Vernon, you save 5 other cats that follow him. Another example of this particular relationship.
Can I interject real quick? Because
Sure.
That's an amazing story, and it's great that the kid is doing better, and I think that is the result of those relationships. But if I understand you correctly, one of the subplots I heard in there, the non-athletic, non-football officer, Lewis, actually caught these kids. Did I hear that correctly?
I don't know if he was the one that caught him.
Okay, I'm just checking.
I just know he got caught. Like, I don't know. But yeah.
Because we won't talk about softball, but go ahead with your other story.
The other example, he just wants to bring out the fact that they beat us in softball. But you're still kind of up in the air because the officers did keep score. So we don't really know. But the other amazing example, and I'll leave it at this, is with the district attorney's office, we had a young man that I knew. Well, he's not a young man. He's in his 40s. Got out of prison for a drug case. Stayed out about 6-8 months, maybe a little bit longer. Catches another drug case. Ends up going through the process and accepts a deal for 5 years and 6 months in prison. When I heard about it, through his son, who's a part of our youth program, his son was struggling at MLK, straight Fs, and they didn't know what to do with him. And I asked him, what's going on? Like, my dad's going back to prison, and I'm going. He didn't know what was going to happen to him. We reached out to the district attorney's office on behalf of the dad, said, hey, can we have him? We think we can help this young man. Now, mind you, this person had already been through the system, already been adjudicated and accepted a 5-year prison sentence and was turning himself in to go to prison. District attorney stopped the process, allowed him to come back and redo his plea, and instead of doing no 5-year sentence, gave him the brother to brother. This was about a year and a half ago. Since that time, he started working at Clark Pacific, gotten a promotion. Now he's a supervisor, been straight and narrow. But not only has the dad turned his life around, the son went from Fs to 3.5, literally. So when you help the parents stabilize the family, you help the young man. And that's what brother to brother does. And that's what having the relationships with the district attorney's office and the police department is what enables us to do. We've never had that before. And that's why I think we're in a remarkable time in our city to continue to move forward.
I don't think there's any better story than that.
No, that's amazing.
We can't
That's
top that
changing
one.
multiple generations.
Yes.
No question
Right.
about that.
So, Anne Marie, as your role as DA and for this office, how have you found being able to work with Mervin or just call him when you need to? How has that been helpful?
Well,
for
it's
you?
helpful because I trust him. I mean, and I think he trusts me. And if I tell him, I'm going to be straight up about this case, here's the deal, he's going to understand that. I've heard some people say, oh, let's take this case to, let's see if the DA will give us X, Y, and Z. I'm like, well, that's funny because Mervin's not asking about this one. And that makes me think, okay, Mervin suspects this is not the right case for that. So I think it's just, again, it goes back to the courtroom and the community that, we're trying to make good, sound judgments in the courtroom. And sometimes having more information and credible information can affect a change in how we are going to prosecute a case.
We all know that every organization does face challenges and hard times. So can I get from all your perspectives how these kinds of partnerships help when you are facing some difficult times?
Well, brother to brother seem like we always facing hard times, but,
In what way is that?
Well,
just lack of resources or?
Lack of resources primarily, but...
How is Brother to Brother funded? Is it all private donations? Do you get any government funding or grant funding?
Well, the only funding that we received was the Gang Task Force Intervention
Is that the city
program,
of Sacramento?
The city of Sacramento. And then District Attorney, we were able to receive a grant for our mentoring program at Grant High School.
Chief?
Yeah, I mean, Brother to Brother does a lot of things outside of the criminal justice system on their own in the community, helping whether it be homeless or kids or families, feeding programs, all sorts of things that they do outside of the criminal justice system. But one of the things they do that I think is invaluable to the criminal justice system is, we always have to take victims into consideration. When we have crimes, there's typically victims. And so we have to take their feelings and their desires into consideration, especially on the DA side, I would guess. But at the same time, I think all of us really understand that some young person doing something wrong in our community is typically, a lot of times, they got drug issues or family issues or other things that are playing a really big role in the cause of them doing something wrong. And if we're able to get those things handled, then they're probably not going to be causing problems in our community. And so what Brother to Brother provides is another alternative for the criminal justice system away from incarceration or things like that, because one, they're very successful. They understand and people listen to them. And so it provides another avenue for whether it be police officers or the district attorney to get to the root cause of what's causing this young person's issues. And if those are solved, we're going to have a very productive person in our community, as opposed to maybe locking them up and they don't get solved. As soon as they're all going to get out, and then they're going to be causing problems again. And so I think in terms of funding, it's one of my issues with Brother to Brother is I don't think they get the funding that we as a community need from them. And so I don't think there's a better organization in our community for our community to get funding than Brother to Brother. They've proven it over and over. They continue to prove it, and they're a steady force in our community that improve. I mean, I've watched them improve people's lives, and not only people that are doing things in our community that are not productive, but in officers' lives too.
Having folks like Mervin's, I'd call him like the mayor of Del Paso Heights, because people know him, they respect him, they understand that, he can't work miracles, but he's going to do what he can. So working with him, I can go say to somebody, a defense attorney, hey, we're willing to give the guy X, Y, and Z. That's one thing. But when Mervin says, listen, they're willing to take this chance on you because of our program, that person is much more likely to be successful because, one, we know the program works, but because Mervin is the one that's leading it. So it's an enormous benefit. And I mean it when I say it. We cannot expect police and prosecutors to solve the problems that we face as a community. You can't. And you need people like Mervin. And he talks about Brother to Brother and the funding or the lack thereof. I went out there, I don't know what it was, maybe a couple years ago, and when I met also with Sister to Sister. There's an enormous need in Del Paso Heights for even more funding for young women, because we've got a lot of young women that are at risk or already being victimized by human trafficking. And so when we talk about funding needs, that's enormous because, if someone goes down that road, it's tragic and we want to stop that. But that's where sister to sister, brother to brother can really help us because, the DA telling somebody, you got to change your life, that's one thing. But when Mervin says, listen, I've lived that life and I've changed my life and I don't want you to have the life I had a while ago. That's an enormous amount of goodwill that we have there.
We're going to go ahead and end the discussion here. So thank you, DA Schubert, Mervin Brookins, and Chief Hahn for the conversation today. Join us for a future episode where we'll focus more on the Sister to Sister program that was mentioned a few times today and how that program is working to turn the lives around of young women. Join us for our next episode where we'll start a 3-part series focusing on hate crimes.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find all of the Justice Journal podcasts on our website at sacda.org, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.